called it mental radio, because the concept was, this is like a radio is receiving information. And when they put people who had psychic abilities in these rooms that were shielded, they found that they actually performed better. And so they realized that, no, it's not that an electromagnetic signal is being sent from somewhere else. It's got to be some other mechanism than that. And in fact, they realized that there's actually noise when electromagnetic information is coming in. It actually sort of confuses things, which is interesting, because we live now in
a lot of noise
times in the biggest ocean of electromagnetic noise probably ever.
Probably ever to happen on Earth, with the cell phone towers and the
you kidding?
radio waves and the television sets. And what?
You kidding? I mean, I was just reading something the other day that said that, you go back just like 4 years ago, and we went from having like 2 billion text messages a year to 110 billion text messages a year, and that's just looking at text messages,
Absolutely.
Yeah, so it's the amount of information. I mean, the number of people who are doing internet.
By the way, your dog is in this show. I just want you to know. And I'm delighted. What is your dog's name? We should probably honor the dog.
Pavarotti.
Pavarotti. He sounds, or she sounds, a little different than the original. But if you could ask Pavarotti to bark one more time, we'll do an analysis.
Well, I named him because he has that soulful look in his eyes, and
he's in a broadcast now. It's very exciting to have all three of us involved. And
yeah, he's come back from. Actually, I adopted him from the Humane Society about the same time that Pavarotti had passed.
Aww.
So. Anyway, so that's part of why he's named Pavarotti. But
very good.
Anyway, yeah, he's here part of our broadcast, yes. No additional charge.
Let's talk about the near-death experience. Should we talk a little bit about that?
Oh, sure. I love that.
This is a common theme that has been discussed by people that have supposedly died, at least on the physical. And in your book, you talk about an example of how a little girl, I guess an 8-year-old girl, was brain dead for 19 minutes. Her pupils were dilated and fixated, and I'm paraphrasing, obviously, and she went to heaven, was told to return to help out with her yet-to-be-born brother, and was telling her mother about the doctor after she was resuscitated and brought back to life.
Right.
Where did you find that?
That was actually published in a pediatric journal by this pediatrician who was he was so fascinated by the fact that this little girl recognized him when she ran into him in the hospital, and his whole interaction with her was during a time period when she was clinically dead, that he was shocked by it and he thought he should write about it. And that article is it's over 20 years old, and it's one of those things where it was published in a pediatric journal, but the fact that science wants to see things happen in a laboratory and under controlled conditions and whatnot, they still would not take it into consideration in coming up with a model for understanding, the relationship between consciousness and the brain.
Isn't there a way, Dianne, through science to have what happens to people's lives be capturing people's experience all over the world, like for near-death experiences? Why can't a portion of that be allocated to science? Because you can't control that in a lab. People are usually going through events they didn't plan on, right?
Yeah, well, most psychic events happen, in a way that people didn't plan on, and then scientists criticize them as invalid because they weren't orchestrated and didn't happen in a laboratory. And one of the things that we know about telepathy and precognition is that we're more likely, even if we're somebody who doesn't normally experience psychic events, we're more likely to experience telepathy or precognition if it's a crisis occurring either on a grand scale, like there were a lot of people who reported that they had dreams and precognitions of 9/11, before and after the effect.
Didn't you have a patient also?
Oh, yeah.
Talk about that.
I had a patient of mine who was she was supposed to be on one of those planes out of Boston, and that went into the towers, and she, at the last minute, for reasons that she didn't understand, she just said, I don't know why, I just decided I didn't want to get on that plane. I wanted to spend another day in Boston. And she would have been dead.
Isn't that funny how it's not always a direct and obvious thing. It's a feeling or a sense.
No, it's not. That's the thing, is it's not that she had a vision of the plane being, hijacked and then crashed. It's just that she just had this feeling like, I want to stay in Boston another day. Well, I mean, from the, any objective standpoint, that decision didn't make sense. She was in Boston on business, monitoring drug trials, for a drug company. She was done. She didn't have any business reason to stay in Boston. She didn't have family in Boston. She really didn't have any real strong reason to stay in Boston. It was just something inside of her that just made her decide she didn't want to hop on a plane that morning, and she canceled and postponed it till the next day. She doesn't know why. And that gets back to what I was saying about like the presentiment experiments, that where people have these, you can record the physiological responses to something that is stressful. They can have those responses before the picture's even shown. And one of the arguments that Dean Radin, who's a major researcher in this area, and he's the one who did this presentiment research, he says, well, if it's happening a tenth of a second before, then we know that time is not how we
think it
expected it. And so what's the difference between a tenth of a second before and a second before, or 2 seconds before, or a day before? I mean, all of a sudden, because your whole paradigm for understanding time has gotten turned on its head. And that's what Einstein did. Einstein turned our concept of time on its head. And this is one of the things that's so interesting to me, that people can accept within physics these ideas that that time isn't an arrow, that's not how it operates. They can accept it within this sort of abstract world of physics, but then because their own experience for a lot of people is they experience it as though it's an arrow and that it only goes forward. They think that's how reality is. And our perception is just we know, we have all these experiments on perception, that our perception is colored by what we expect to perceive. So if you expect to see time as something that only can go forward and can't go backwards, or can't leap ahead and then come backwards, then if that's how you conceive of it, then you're never going to actually perceive it any differently.
When I learned about remote viewing and interviewed Paul Smith, even actually before I interviewed him, I was clear that our notions of time are completely erroneous, not even in the realm of what's happening.
Right.
And to know that $50 million